The sun was setting over Zeros, painting the endless desert in hues of crimson and gold. Raymond Rye Sanders stood at the window of his modest dwelling watching as the last mining shuttles returned to the excavation site. Another day of extraction complete, another day closer to his contract's end. 5 years on this desolate rock had hardened him, stripped away the idealistic engineer who'd first arrived from Earth. Now all that remained was a pragmatic shell, counting days and hoarding credits. Rye's home sat on the outskirts of Drywell, the largest settlement within 50 miles of the primary excavation site. It wasn't much 3 rooms carved into the side of a mesa, but it offered privacy, which he valued above all else. The locals, tall, purple-skinned Zeroians with their elaborate family markings and endless ceremonies, kept their distance from the Earthman, who spoke little and smiled less. He checked his pocket chronometer. 2 hours until midnight. Time enough for a drink at the Scarlet Dune before turning in. The bar represented the closest thing to a social life Rye permitted himself. Not for company, the mining crews were too rowdy, the locals too formal, but for the taste of Earth whiskey that Hank the proprietor somehow procured, despite embargoes and trade restrictions. Rye pulled on his sand-resistant jacket, checked his personal shield generator, and stepped out into the cooling night air. Zeros's twin moons had begun their nightly dance across the starscape, casting long shadows across the dunes. The wind carried the scent of mineral dust and the faint electrical discharge from the mining operations to the north. The walk to the Scarlet Dune took 20 minutes, following a well-worn path through stands of crystalline cacti that chimed softly in the breeze. Rye's boots crunched on the crimson sand, his pace methodical and unhurried. The bar's garish neon sign came into view as he crested a small rise, its red glow a beacon in the gathering darkness. Evening Sanders. Hank called from behind the bar as Rye entered. The place was unusually empty for this hour, just a few miners playing cards in the corner, and a solitary Zeroian noble slumped at the bar. The usual. Rye nodded, taking his customary seat at the far end of the counter. He noticed the Zeroian immediately. It was hard not to. The alien's elaborate robes and facial markings indicated high status, though their current state of disarray suggested he'd been drinking heavily. Even in the dim light, Rye could make out the insignia of House Varen, one of the oldest noble bloodlines on the planet. Hank slid a glass of amber liquid across the counter. "That's the last of my Earth stock," he said with a grimace. "Trade ships 3 weeks delayed. Might be the coalition blockade acting up again." Rye grunted in acknowledgement, lifting the glass to his lips and savoring the burn. Real Earth whiskey, not the synthetic swill most places served. It reminded him of home, of rain and green fields, and a life he'd left behind. Human. The Zeroian noble suddenly lurched upright, pointing a wavering finger at Rye. "You, Earthman, you want special drink." Rye ignored him, turning slightly away. Getting involved with drunk nobles was asking for trouble, and trouble was precisely what he'd come to Zeros to avoid. "I see you, appreciating fine spirits." The noble persisted, his universal standards slurred, but understandable. "I am Lord Varen. I have proposition." "Not interested," Rye replied without looking up. Lord Varen was undeterred. He slid unsteadily down the bar until he was sitting beside Rye, the smell of fermented cactus fruit heavy on his breath. "I have bottle, special bottle, from Earth. Very old. Very valuable." Despite himself, Rye's interest was piqued. "What kind of bottle?" The Zeroian's 4-fingered hand disappeared into his robes, emerging with a dusty container that made Hank gasp audibly. Macallan, single malt, 100 years aged. It was genuine, Rye could tell at a glance. The bottle alone would fund a return ticket to Earth, with enough left over for a year's comfortable living. "What do you want for it?" he asked, careful to keep his voice neutral. Lord Varen's painted lips stretched into what might have been a smile or a grimace. "A wager. Simple game of chance." "I don't gamble." "Not money," the noble waved dismissively. Something else. Rye should have walked away then. Later, he would replay this moment in his mind countless times, imagining what might have happened if he'd simply finished his drink and left. But the whiskey, the real earth whiskey, gleamed in the bar's low light, and 5 years of exile had worn down his caution. What kind of wager? Lord Varenne produced a set of bones carved with ancient Zeroyan symbols. Fate bones. You roll. If ancestral symbols favor you, bottle is yours. And if they don't? The noble's face darkened. Then you take burden from me. You become guardian. Rye frowned. Guardian of what? My daughters. Lord Varenne's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. 3. All troublesome. All need guardian until maturity ceremony. 2 standard years. Rye almost laughed. The noble was clearly too drunk to be serious. You'd bet your daughters on a game of chance. Lord Varenne's eyes narrowed. Not bet. Transition of guardianship. Sacred tradition. Very honorable. Not interested, Rye said firmly, turning back to his drink. Something in the noble's demeanor changed. He straightened, suddenly looking far more sober than moments before. You refuse challenge from House Varenne. This is grave insult. Hank leaned across the bar. Careful, Sanders, he muttered. Refusing a formal challenge can get you expelled from the planet. Contract or no contract. Rye cursed under his breath. Zeroyan customs were labyrinthine and strict. He'd managed to avoid most entanglements by keeping to himself, but if this was indeed a formal challenge, the consequences could be severe. Fine, he said. 1 roll, but I want terms in writing. Lord Varenne's features stretched into that unsettling, not-quite smile again. Of course, Hank Human will witness. The bartender produced a standard contract tablet, and Lord Varenne pressed his palm to it, dictating terms that appeared in both Universal Standard and flowing Zeroyan script. Rye scanned the document quickly. It seemed straightforward enough. If he won, he got the bottle. If he lost, he would become guardian to Lord Varenne's 3 daughters for exactly 2 standard years. A warning flashed in his mind. This was too easy, too convenient. But the whiskey called to him, and, after 5 years of exile, his judgment was perhaps not what it once had been. Rye pressed his palm to the tablet, and the contract sealed with a soft chime. Lord Varenne presented the fate bones with theatrical flourish. 3 polished crystals, each etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the bar's dim light. Cast upon counter. Ancestral will decide. With a sigh, Rye took the crystals. They were heavier than they looked warm to the touch. He rolled them across the bar's surface, watching as they clattered and spun before coming to rest. Silence fell. Lord Varenne stared at the bones, his expression unreadable. Then, to Rye's surprise, the noble threw back his head and laughed, a high, keening sound that made the miners in the corner look up in alarm. What? Rye demanded. What does it mean? Hank leaned forward, examining the symbols. Triple crown, he said, sounding impressed. That's extremely rare. Lord Varenne pushed the bottle toward Rye, still making that strange laughing sound. Bottle is yours, Earthman. Guardianship also yours. Most auspicious sign. The elders will be most interested. Before Rye could respond, the noble stood straightened his robes with surprising dignity and strode from the bar without another word. What just happened? Rye asked, confusion, mixing with growing apprehension. Hank shook his head slowly. You just became guardian to 3 noble daughters of House Varenne, and rolled the most powerful combination on the fate bones while doing it. By tomorrow, the entire settlement will know. It was just a drunken game, Rye protested. He can't actually transfer guardianship of his children over a bar bet. He can, and he did, Hank replied grimly. That contract you signed is binding under Zeroyan law, and with that roll, he gestured to the bones still glowing on the counter. The elders will see it as divine sanction. Rye stared at the bottle of whiskey, its amber contents suddenly less appealing. So, what happens now? Now I'd go home and make room for 3 Zeroyan noble daughters. They'll arrive within the day, I expect. Rai grabbed the bottle and stood, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. This is absurd. I'm an off-worlder. I know nothing about raising Zeroyan children. They're not children, Hank called as Rai headed for the door. They're young women of marriage age, which makes your position even more complicated. The walk back to his dwelling was a blur. Rai's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. He could break contract and leave the planet, but that would mean abandoning 5 years of accumulated pay and benefits. He could appeal to the mining corporation, but they were notoriously reluctant to interfere in local customs. He could confront Lord Varen directly, but challenging a noble in his own home could have severe consequences. By the time he reached his mesa dwelling, Rai had decided on a course of action. He would accept the guardianship formally, then immediately petition for its dissolution on grounds of cultural incompatibility. It would cost him Zeroyan. Legal proceedings were never cheap, but it was his best chance at a clean resolution. Dawn found him still awake, drafting the petition on his personal terminal. The bottle of Macallan sat unopened on his table, a reminder of his own foolishness. The first sun was just cresting the horizon when the notification chime sounded, indicating visitors at his outer door. Rai sighed, scrubbing a hand over his face. Too late to run, too late to hide. He crossed to the entrance and pressed the release. The door slid open to reveal 3 Zeroyan women, standing in the morning light, each bearing the distinctive violet skin and facial markings of House Varen. Behind them, a small hover transport was already pulling away, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward. She wore a form-fitting outfit that appeared to be some kind of combat suit, with various weapons strapped across her body. Her eyes, a startling silver against her purple skin, assessed Rai coldly. "You are Sanders," she stated, rather than asked. "I am Aaron. These are my sisters Mila and Zira." She gestured to the other 2 women. "We are now in your guardianship as dictated by formal contract and the will of the ancestors." Rai stared at them, momentarily speechless. He had expected children, teenagers at most. Instead, he faced 3 grown women who appeared fully capable of handling themselves. "There's been a misunderstanding," he began. "Your father was intoxicated when—" "There is no misunderstanding," interrupted the second woman, Mila. Unlike her warrior sister, she wore scholarly robes and carried what appeared to be ancient texts. "The contract is valid. The Fate Bones have spoken. We are bound to your guardianship for 2 standard years." The third sister, Zira, was dressed in elaborate diplomatic attire. She smiled at Rai, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We've brought our essential belongings. The rest will arrive later today. May we enter our new home?" Rai stood frozen in the doorway, the full impact of his situation finally hitting him. 3 alien women, daughters of nobility now legally in his care, living in his small dwelling, bound to him for 2 full years. "I'm filing a petition for dissolution," he said, finally stepping aside to let them enter. "This arrangement won't last." Erin brushed past him, her shoulder deliberately bumping his. "The Council of Elders won't grant it. Not with a Triple Crown casting. We are bound together by forces beyond mere law." The 3 women moved into his living space, examining their new surroundings, with expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. Zira ran a finger along his sparse shelving. Mila moved immediately to his terminal, scanning the petition he'd been drafting. Aaron began a methodical inspection of the dwelling's defenses and exit points. "I live alone," Rai said unnecessarily. "There's only one sleeping chamber." "We will adapt," Mila replied without looking up. "As must you." Rai watched as these 3 strangers, his wards according to Zeroyan law, began rearranging his possessions, making space for their arrival containers. A sense of unreality washed over him. 5 years of careful isolation, undone in a single night over a bottle of whiskey. "Why would your father do this?" he asked finally. "Why give up guardianship of his own daughters?" The 3 sisters exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Zira spoke her diplomatic training evident in her measured tone. House Varen faces challenges. Our father's decisions have left our family vulnerable. The guardianship transfer removes us from immediate danger while maintaining our noble status. What kind of danger? The kind that results when a noble house can no longer pay its debts, Aaron said bluntly, or protect its bloodlines. Rai sank into a chair, the implications settling heavily on his shoulders. So I'm not just a guardian. I'm a shield. A temporary one. Mila confirmed, closing his terminal with a decisive gesture. For exactly 2 years until we reach our inheritance age and can claim our birthrights independently. And what happens if someone comes looking for you? I'm just one man. Aaron's hand moved to one of the weapons at her belt. I am trained in all 16 forms of Zeroian combat arts. I will handle any physical threats. I am versed in legal precedent and noble rights, added Zira. No challenge will succeed through official channels. And I, said Mila, her voice quieter, but no less confident. No secrets of our world that few remember. We are not defenseless, Guardian Sanders. We merely require your legal protection. Rai looked from one alien face to another, seeing determination in each set of eyes. They hadn't chosen the situation any more than he realized. They were making the best of their father's desperate gamble. 2 years, he said finally. Not a day more. And we establish ground rules immediately. Aaron nodded stiffly. Acceptable. We begin with sleeping arrangements and daily duties. As the sisters settled into discussing logistics, Rai felt a headache building behind his eyes. He glanced at the unopened bottle of whiskey on the table, the prize that had cost him his solitude. 2 years. He could survive 2 years. How complicated could guarding 3 alien noblewomen possibly be? He would soon find out just how naive that question was. The first week of cohabitation proved more challenging than Rai had anticipated. His once orderly dwelling became a chaos of belonging schedules and competing priorities. Aaron insisted on fortifying the perimeter with additional security measures. Mila converted his storage alcove into a makeshift study, filling it with ancient texts and curious artifacts. Zira established a communication array that constantly chimed with messages from various noble houses and diplomatic channels. Rai's attempt to maintain separate living spaces quickly collapsed under practical constraints. His dwelling, comfortable for 1, was cramped for 4. Privacy became a distant memory. The sisters established a rotating schedule for the sleeping chamber, with the others making do with pallets in the main room. Rai found himself most often on the floor of his own home, lying awake, and wondering how his life had veered so dramatically off course. The Council of Elders, as predicted, rejected his petition for dissolution. The official response came attached with grainy footage from the Scarlet Dune, showing the moment the Fate Bones had landed in their auspicious configuration. The message was clear: the ancestors had spoken. The guardianship would stand. By the 10th day, a routine of sorts had emerged. Rai continued his work at the mining operation during daylight hours. Aaron often accompanied him ostensibly as protection, but clearly also to ensure he didn't attempt to flee the planet. Mila spent her days poring over ancient texts, occasionally venturing into the desert to examine what she called remnant sites. Zira managed House Varen's diplomatic affairs remotely, maintaining their family's connections while keeping their precarious financial situation hidden from rival houses. Evenings were the most difficult. Forced proximity led to conversation, and conversation inevitably turned to questions. The sisters were curious about Earth, about Rai's past, about what had brought him to this desolate planet. He deflected as best he could, sharing only superficial details. Yes, he was a trained engineer. No, he had no family waiting for him. Yes, Earth had vast oceans and forests, unlike Zeros's endless deserts. In turn, he learned bits and pieces about his 3 wards. Aaron, the eldest, had been training in combat since early childhood, groomed to serve as House Varen's champion in the increasingly common honor duels among noble families. Mila, the middle daughter, had rejected traditional diplomatic training to pursue forbidden knowledge of Zeros's ancient past. Zira, though youngest, had already established herself as a rising diplomatic talent, using her charm and intelligence to navigate Zeroian high society. On the 15th day, the first attack came. Rai was returning from his shift, the larger of Zeros's twin sons, just beginning to set. Aaron walked beside him, alert, as always. They had barely exchanged a dozen words all day, their usual pattern. The ambush was swift and professional. 4 figures in dust-colored stealth suits emerged from the crystalline cacti that lined the path, energy weapons already charging. Rai had just enough time to activate his personal shield before the first blast struck. Aaron moved with astonishing speed. In one fluid motion, she drew twin blades from her back harness and leapt toward the nearest attacker. Rai, operating on instinct, dropped low and pulled his own sidearm, a mining tool repurposed as a weapon. What followed was a blur of violence. Aaron's combat training was no mere boast. She fought with graceful precision, her blades finding gaps in the attacker's armor with unerring accuracy. Rai provided covering fire, forcing 2 of the assailants to seek shelter behind a rocky outcropping. House Thraxa markings, Aaron called as she disabled one attacker with a precise strike to the joint of his armor. Mercenaries. Rai didn't waste breath responding. His shield flickered dangerously as it absorbed another energy blast. He adjusted his weapon's output and fired again, catching one of the sheltering attackers in the leg. The figure fell cursing in Zeroian. The remaining 2 mercenaries, recognizing the shift in odds, activated retreat boosters and disappeared over the nearest dune, leaving their wounded companions behind. Aaron stood over the disabled attackers, her blades poised at their throats. "Who sent you?" she demanded in rapid Zeroian. One of the mercenaries laughed, dark purple blood seeping from a wound in his side. "Ask your father. Ask which debt he hasn't paid." Rai approached cautiously, his weapon still raised. "We should contact settlement security." Aaron shook her head. "They won't interfere in noble matters. Help me bind them. We'll question them properly at the dwelling." "We're not taking prisoners to my home," Rai protested. Aaron's silver eyes flashed with anger. "They attacked a guardian and his ward. By law, their lives are forfeit. We need information, and then justice must be served." The cold practicality in her voice sent a shiver down Rai's spine. "No killings," he said firmly. "We'll get your information, but then we turn them over to mining security as trespassers. Let them deal with it." For a tense moment, Aaron looked ready to argue. Then, surprisingly, she nodded. "As my guardian commands. But the interrogation happens first." They bound the mercenaries with emergency restraints from Rai's kit, and half-dragged, half-carried them back to the dwelling. Mila and Zira looked up in alarm as they entered with their prisoners. "House Thraxa," Aaron announced. "They claim father's debts." Zira's diplomatic poise cracked slightly. "Already we expected at least a month before they moved against us." Mila immediately began clearing space in the main room. "Put them there. I have something that will loosen their tongues without permanent damage." Rai watched in growing concern as she produced a small vial of iridescent liquid from among her scholarly materials. "What is that?" "Essence of truth crystal," Mila replied. "Extracted from the southern caves. Perfectly legal," she added, noting his expression. "Just rare." The interrogation was brief, but informative. Under the influence of Mila's concoction, the mercenaries revealed that Lord Varen had borrowed heavily from House Thraxa to cover gambling debts. When unable to repay, he had offered his daughter's hand in marriage to the elderly Thraxa patriarch. The transfer of guardianship to Rai had disrupted this arrangement, prompting the attack. "They meant to kill you, and claim we died in the same attack," Aaron explained, after the prisoners had been taken away by a reluctant mining security team. "With no guardian and no witnesses, they could claim we had never legally left our father's care." Rai paced the length of his now crowded main room, mind racing. "This is exactly why I didn't want entanglements. My contract has 18 months left. I can't spend that time fighting off mercenaries and navigating noble politics. You won't have to, Zira, said, her diplomatic demeanor returned. Now that we know the specific threat, we can address it directly. I'll arrange a formal challenge through proper channels. Meaning what exactly? Meaning I will challenge House Thraxa's claim in the Elder Council, Zira explained patiently. Our guardianship transfer was legitimate and witnessed. The Fate Bones confirmed it. They cannot touch us without violating sacred tradition. And if they don't care about tradition, Rai asked, then I will kill their champions in formal combat, Aaron stated, matter-of-factly. House Varen's honor will be satisfied, and the debt nullified. Rai looked at the three sisters, their alien features set in determined expressions. For the first time, he fully grasped the complexity of the situation he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about providing shelter for three displaced noblewomen. He had become entangled in generations of Zeroyan politics traditions and blood feuds. I need a drink, he muttered, reaching for the still unopened bottle of Macallan. Myla's hand shot out, catching his wrist. Not that one, she said quietly. It's the last thing our father gave us in his way. Save it for when we truly need its strength. Something in her tone made Rai pause. He looked at the bottle with new eyes, seeing it not just as his prize from a foolish wager, but as a symbol of this strange new family unit, dysfunctional as it might be. Fine, he conceded, but I'm still having a drink, just not that one. That night, as they sat together, sharing Rai's more modest reserves of synthetic spirits, a subtle shift occurred. The sisters spoke more openly about their father, about his decline following their mother's death, about his desperate attempts to maintain House Varen's status through increasingly risky ventures. For his part, Rai shared more about his reasons for coming to Zeros, the engineering accident on Earth that had cost lives, the settlement that had bankrupted him, the self-imposed exile as penance. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. The following weeks brought changes to their living arrangement. Using salvaged materials from the mining operation, Rai expanded the dwelling, adding a second sleeping chamber, and reinforcing the structure against potential attacks. Aaron established a rigorous security protocol, including regular patrols and sensor arrays, hidden among the surrounding crystalline cacti. Myla converted part of the new space into a proper study, her collection of ancient texts and artifacts now organized, rather than haphazardly stacked. Zira set up a formal communication station, managing House Varen's affairs with increasing confidence. Rai found himself gradually pulled into their world. His engineering expertise proved valuable in interpreting some of Myla's ancient technological artifacts. His outsider perspective helped Zira navigate diplomatic challenges with other houses. And though he was no fighter, Aaron began teaching him basic Zeroyan defensive techniques, insisting that a guardian should be able to protect himself. Yet, tensions remained. Rai chafed at the restrictions his new role placed on his freedom. The sisters, despite their cooperation, clearly resented their father's decision to gamble away their guardianship. Arguments flared over space resources and the proper response to continuing threats from House Thraxa. 2 months into their arrangement, the second attack came. This time, it wasn't mercenaries, but a more insidious threat. Rai returned from work to find all three sisters unconscious, the dwelling's air tainted with a sweet-smelling neurotoxin. Only his standard-issue mining respirator saved him from the same fate. After ventilating the dwelling and administering emergency counteragents from Myla's supplies, Rai faced a decision. This was his chance. The sisters incapacitated no witnesses, no legal barriers. He could walk away, book passage on the next off-world transport, leave Zeros and its complications behind. The thought was there, tempting in its simplicity. 5 hours to pack essentials, 6 to reach the spaceport. By morning, he could be off-planet, contract penalties be damned. Instead, he found himself setting up defensive positions, monitoring the sisters' vital signs, preparing for the attackers who would surely follow the toxin. When Aaron finally stirred, groggy but alert, She found Rai armed with her own backup weapons, all exits barricaded, and mining explosives rigged as improvised defenses. "You're still here?" she observed, her voice raspy from the toxin. "Disappointing, isn't it?" he replied, helping her to a sitting position. "I thought about running." "Why didn't you?" Rai checked her pupils, comparing them to the Zeroyan medical reference he'd pulled up. "Because they would have killed you. All three of you. And I've got enough ghosts already." The attack, when it came, was met with prepared resistance. House Thraxa had sent a full extraction team, expecting to find 4 unconscious occupants. Instead, they encountered a defended position and a warning the next incursion would trigger a formal blood feud with all the ancient rites that entailed. It was a bluff. Rai had no authority to declare such a feud, but it worked. The extraction team withdrew, and the message filtered back through Zeroyan noble channels. The Earth Guardian was more formidable than anticipated. In the aftermath, as they repaired damage to the dwelling, something fundamental changed in the dynamic between Rai and the 3 sisters. The lingering resentment faded, replaced by cautious respect. He had proven his commitment to their safety, even when escape was an option. That night, sharing the dwelling's main room, as Mila finalized repairs to the sleeping chambers, they spoke more openly than ever before. "Why did your father really transfer guardianship?" Rai asked. "The truth this time." The sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Mila spoke. "The Starstone," she said simply. "He believed you could help us find it." "What's a Starstone?" "An ancient artifact," Mila explained, her scholarly enthusiasm evident. "According to legends, it's a device from before the Great Drying, when Zeros had oceans and forests. It supposedly contains the combined knowledge of the early Zeroyan civilization." "And your father thinks I can help find this artifact?" Rai couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "Why?" "Because you're human," Zira said, as if this explained everything. When Rai's expression remained blank, she continued. "The most ancient texts speak of visitors from beyond the sky who helped build the first great Zeroyan cities, beings remarkably similar to humans in description." Rai scoffed. "So your father sold your guardianship for a bottle of whiskey because of some ancient astronaut theory?" "Not just that," Aaron interjected. "The fate bones confirmed it. Triple Crown, the mark of the sky visitors. When they fell that way for you, it proved the connection." "This is absurd," Rai said, standing to pace the room. "I'm an engineer, not an archaeologist, and certainly not some prophesied alien savior." "We don't need a savior," Mila said quietly. "We need someone who can touch the ancient technology without harm. Zeroyans who attempt it suffer severe neural damage. But the texts suggest the sky visitors could manipulate the devices freely." Rai stopped pacing. "That's why you've been studying those artifacts. You're looking for the Starstone." Mila nodded. "It's said to be hidden in the deep desert, protected by trials. Only the worthy can pass. With it, House Varen could restore its fortunes and standing. Without it—" She trailed off, but the implication was clear. "So I'm not just a shield against mercenaries," Rai said bitterly. "I'm a tool for treasure hunting." "At first, perhaps," Zira admitted. "But things have changed. You've proven yourself a true guardian regardless of how the role came to you." Rai wasn't sure whether to feel angry at the deception or grudgingly impressed by the complexity of Lord Varen's gambit. Before he could decide, a notification chimed at Zira's communication station. Her expression grew grave as she read the incoming message. "The Elder Council has summoned us. All 4 of us. House Thraxa has formally challenged our guardianship arrangement." "On what grounds?" Aaron demanded, instantly alert. "That father was intoxicated when transferring guardianship, making the contract invalid despite the fate bones." Rai sank back into his chair. "They're not wrong." "It doesn't matter," Mila insisted. "The Triple Crown supersedes all other considerations. But we must appear before the council tomorrow at high sun." That night, sleep eluded Rai. The thought of facing the Elder Council mysterious figures who embodied Zeroyan tradition and law filled him with apprehension. More concerning was the realization that he had come to care about the outcome about what happened to these three alien women who had upended his carefully isolated existence. The council chambers were located in the ancient heart of Drywell, a massive structure carved from a single, massive crystal formation. As they approached the following day, Rai felt distinctly out of place in his modified mining uniform. Beside him, the three sisters wore their formal house attire: Aaron, in ceremonial combat armor, Mila, in scholarly robes, Zira, in diplomatic finery. "Remember," Zira whispered, as they reached the ornate entrance, "speak only when directly addressed. Show deference, but not submission. You are a guardian now entitled to respect, but expected to demonstrate humility." "Anything else?" Rai muttered, eyeing the towering crystal doors. "Yes," Aaron said with surprising gentleness. "Whatever happens in there, we face it together." The council chamber itself was a vast amphitheater, its crystalline walls refracting light in hypnotic patterns. 9 elders sat on elevated thrones, their ancient purple faces, nearly black with aged bodies, thin and frail, beneath elaborate ceremonial garments. Arrayed against them on one side stood representatives of House Thraxa, including the patriarch himself, a withered figure whose eyes burned with malicious vitality. The proceedings began with formal introductions and declarations of intent. House Thraxa's advocate spoke first eloquently, presenting their claim Lord Varen had promised his daughters in marriage alliance before the guardianship transfer. The transfer occurred while he was intoxicated. The daughters were the rightful property of House Varen, not to be disposed of on a whim. Rai felt his anger rising at the casual reference to the sisters as property. Before he could speak out of turn, Zara stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in every measured gesture. "Esteemed elders," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "The claim of House Thraxa rests on 2 falsehoods. First, that a verbal promise of marriage alliance supersedes the sacred ritual of the Fate Bones. Second, that my sisters and I are property to be transferred, rather than noble daughters with rights of our own." She proceeded to dismantle House Thraxa's argument with precision, citing ancient precedents and sacred texts. As she spoke, Rai noticed Mila subtly positioning herself near one of the chamber's crystal formations, her hand occasionally brushing against its surface, as if taking readings. The Thraxa patriarch grew increasingly agitated as Zira continued. Finally, he slammed his staff against the chamber floor, interrupting her. "Enough technicalities and ancient texts," he rasped. "The matter is simple. Lord Varen owes House Thraxa a substantial debt. His daughters were pledged as payment. This off-worlder has no claim to guardianship, Fate Bones or no." The eldest of the council elders raised a gnarled hand. "What say you to this, Guardian Sanders? Why should an Earthman hold guardianship over daughters of an ancient Zeroyan house?" All eyes turned to Rai. He felt woefully unprepared, acutely aware of his alien status in this chamber of tradition and ancient power. But something in the dismissive way the Thraxa patriarch had spoken ignited a resolve within him. "I make no claim to understand all your traditions," Rai began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I didn't seek this guardianship, but since it was bestowed upon me by legal contract and by your sacred Fate Bones, I have fulfilled its obligations to the best of my ability." He gestured to the 3 sisters. "These women are not property to be traded for debt settlement. They are individuals of remarkable talent and character. As their guardian, I stand against any who would reduce them to bargaining chips in noble politics." The chamber fell silent. The elders conferred among themselves in hushed tones. Finally, the eldest spoke again. "The council recognizes the sincerity of your commitment, Guardian Sanders. However, tradition must be respected. House Thraxa's claim, while crudely stated, has legal merit." Rai's heart sank. Beside him, he felt Aaron tense, her hand moving subtly toward her ceremonial weapon. "Therefore, The elder continued, "We decree that this matter shall be settled in the traditional manner, the trial of bonds." A murmur ran through the chamber. Rai saw alarm flash across Zira's face before her diplomatic mask returned. "The trial will commence in 7 days," the elder pronounced. "Guardian Sanders must prove his worthiness through the 5 challenges. Should he succeed, the guardianship will be confirmed until its natural conclusion. Should he fail, guardianship will transfer to House Thraxa, along with all rights pertaining thereto." With that, the council rose as one, signaling the end of the proceedings. As they filed from the chamber, the Thraxa patriarch approached his withered face, twisted in a malicious smile. "Prepare yourself, Earthman," he hissed. "No off-worlder has ever survived the trial of bonds. In 7 days, those 3 will belong to me, and you will be food for desert scavengers." As they walked back to their dwelling in silence, Rai finally asked the question burning in his mind. "What exactly is this trial of bonds?" "Combat ritual," Aaron answered grimly. "You must face 5 champions in succession, each testing a different aspect of guardianship, strength, wisdom, endurance, sacrifice, and protection." "To the death?" "Not necessarily," Mila said. "But serious injury is common. Few survive all 5 challenges without permanent disability." Rai stopped walking. "You knew this could happen. You knew I might have to face this trial." The sisters exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, Zira spoke. "It was a possibility we hoped to avoid through legal channels. The trial of bonds is rarely invoked in modern times." "House Thraxa must be desperate," Aaron observed. "The trial carries risks for them as well. If you succeed, their claim is permanently invalidated. They can never challenge the guardianship again." Rai resumed, walking, his mind racing. "I'm no warrior. I have basic combat training from the mining corps, but nothing that would help against trained Zeroian champions." "I will train you," Aaron said immediately. 7 days is not much time, but I can teach you enough to survive." "And I have something that might help," Mila added hesitantly. "In the council chamber, I detected unusual energy patterns in the crystal formations. They respond to your presence differently than to ours." "The Starstone connection," Zira murmured. "Exactly. If I can amplify that resonance somehow, it might give you an advantage in the trial." Rai shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane. I should just break contract, forfeit my pay, and leave the planet. You 3 could come with me, get away from all this noble house nonsense." "And go where?" Aaron challenged. "Off-worlders rarely welcome Zeroians, especially without resources. And even if we managed it, we would be forever dishonored. No home, no identity, no future." "Besides," Mila added, "if the Starstone is real, if the connection between humans and ancient Zeroian technology is real, this could change everything. Not just for House Varen, but for all Zeros." Rai looked at the 3 alien women who had become, against all odds, something like family to him. Their determination, their hope, their absolute refusal to be beaten down by circumstances, it stirred something long dormant within him. 7 days, he said finally. "Let's make them count." The week of preparation passed in a blur of activity. Aaron drove Rai mercilessly, training from first light until well after dark, teaching him the fundamentals of Zeroian combat forms. His muscles screamed in protest, unused to the strange movements required to counter Zeroian physiology. Yet he persisted, driven by a determination that surprised even himself. Mila divided her time between researching the trial's historical precedents and experimenting with the resonance she had detected. Using components salvaged from mining equipment, she constructed a device that, when worn against Rai's skin, amplified what she called his chronomagnetic signature. Supposedly the same energy that allowed humans to interact safely with ancient Zeroian technology. Zira worked her diplomatic channels, learning what she could about House Thraxa's chosen champions and seeking potential allies. The news was not encouraging. Thraxa had selected 5 formidable warriors, each specializing in a different combat discipline. On the night before the trial, they gathered in the main room of the dwelling, sharing a meal that Zira had prepared according to ancient, pre-trial tradition. The atmosphere was tense but not hopeless. "We should discuss contingencies," Rai said, breaking the silence. "If I don't survive tomorrow—" "You will survive," Aaron interrupted firmly. "If I don't," he continued, "you three need an escape plan. I've transferred my accumulated pay to a secure account. The access codes are stored in my personal terminal. It's enough to book passage off-world and establish yourselves somewhere without noble politics." The sisters exchanged glances. "We're not planning for your failure," Zira said gently. "But we appreciate the precaution." Mila handed him a small device, no larger than a coin. "Wear this against your skin during the trial. It should enhance your natural resonance with ancient technology." The arena for the trial was built over a remnant site, one of the oldest on Zeros. "If I'm right about the connection—" "If you're right, I might have a chance," Rai finished for her. "And if you're wrong—" She smiled sadly. "Then we face destiny together, whatever comes." Aaron, less comfortable with emotional moments, stood abruptly. "You should rest. Tomorrow will test every limit." As they prepared for sleep, Rai found himself unwilling to be alone with his thoughts. To his surprise, the sisters seemed to share the sentiment. They gathered in the main room, spreading sleeping pallets in a circle, reminiscent of their first awkward days of cohabitation. "Tell us about Earth," Zira requested softly. "Real Earth, not the sanitized version from educational broadcasts." So Rai spoke of rainforests and oceans of crowded cities, and quiet countryside of Earth's varied peoples and cultures. He shared personal memories, climbing mountains in the Alps, swimming in the Mediterranean, walking the ancient streets of cities, built millennia before he was born. In turn, the sisters spoke of Zeros before the great drying legends passed down through generations. They talked of their mother gone too soon, who had taught them to value knowledge and honor equally. Of childhood spent navigating the complex web of noble politics while trying to find their own paths. As the larger moon rose to its zenith, casting silver light through the dwelling's windows, Rai realized with startling clarity that he no longer viewed these three alien women as burdens or obligations. Somewhere in the months of shared danger and grudging cooperation, they had become important to him, worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. With that thought still resonating in his mind, he finally drifted into a restless sleep. The arena for the trial of bonds stood in the oldest part of Drywell, a circular amphitheater carved from living crystal, its walls etched with patterns that told the history of Zeros. As Rai entered through the Challenger's Gate, the rising sun cast prismatic reflections across the sand-covered floor, momentarily blinding him. When his vision cleared, he saw the entire Elder Council seated on an elevated platform, with representatives from various noble houses filling the surrounding tiers. House Thraxa occupied a prominent section, the patriarch's malevolent gaze fixed on Rai. Directly opposite, looking small and vulnerable in the vast space, sat Aaron, Mila, and Zira, his wards for whom he was about to risk everything. The eldest elder rose, arms outstretched. "The trial of bonds commences. Guardian Sanders of Earth will face the 5 challenges to prove his worthiness to hold guardianship over daughters of House Varen. Should he succeed, the bond will be confirmed until its natural conclusion. Should he fail, guardianship transfers to House Thraxa." A gong sounded, its resonance vibrating through the crystal arena. First, challenge strength. The guardian must demonstrate physical power, worthy of protecting noble blood. A massive gate opened across the arena, and Rai's first opponent emerged, a hulking Zeroian warrior, nearly 7 feet tall, muscles bulging beneath ceremonial armor. In his hands, he carried a traditional battling staff, tipped with energy projectors. Rai felt Mila's device warm against his chest. He flexed his fingers, remembering Aaron's training. The warrior approached with deliberate steps, spinning his staff in a display of skill that sent energy crackling across the arena floor. "Begin," commanded the elder. The warrior charged with surprising speed for his size. Rai sidestepped, just as Aaron had taught him, using the Zeroian's momentum against him. The first exchange was a blur of movement, staff whistling through air. Rai ducking and weaving landing quick strikes where armor gaps allowed. But the warrior was skilled and powerful. A glancing blow caught Rai's shoulder, sending him sprawling across the sand. Pain bloomed almost overwhelming. The warrior advanced for the finishing strike. Something shifted in Rai's perception. Time seemed to slow the warrior's movements, becoming predictable, telegraphed. Mila's device burned against his skin, and with it came a strange awareness, as if the very crystal of the arena was responding to his presence, vibrating at a frequency only he could sense. Rai rolled aside from the descending staff, came up inside the warrior's guard, and landed a precise strike to a nerve cluster. Aaron had identified a vulnerability unique to Zeroyan physiology. The massive figure staggered, momentarily paralyzed. Taking advantage of the opening, Rai swept the warrior's legs, sending him crashing to the arena floor. Before his opponent could recover, Rai had the staff, its energy tip pointed at the warrior's throat. Silence fell across the arena. Then the elder's voice. Challenge of strength completed. The guardian has proven his physical worthiness. A murmur rippled through the crowd. From the corner of his eye, Rai saw the Thraxa patriarch lean forward, face contorted with anger. Across the arena, the three sisters maintained careful composure, though he caught Aaron's slight nod of approval. The gong sounded again. Second challenge, wisdom. The guardian must demonstrate judgment worthy of guiding noble minds. The second opponent was altogether different, a slight elderly Zeroyan female, dressed in scholarly robes similar to Mila's. She approached with measured steps, carrying what appeared to be a simple wooden box. The challenge of wisdom requires no combat, the elder explained. Instead, the guardian must solve the puzzle of consequences. Failure results in immediate forfeit of the trial. The elderly scholar placed the box before Rai. It was intricately carved with Zeroyan symbols, many of which he recognized from Mila's studies. When opened, it revealed a complex mechanism of interlocking crystal components. Arrange the pieces to reveal truth, the scholar instructed. But beware, some configurations bring destruction. Rai studied the puzzle carefully. The components seemed designed to channel energy in specific patterns, reminiscent of the mining equipment he worked with daily. But there was something else, a familiarity that went beyond professional knowledge. Again, Mila's device warmed against his skin. As he touched the crystal components, they responded, glowing faintly at his contact. Patterns emerged in his mind, connections between pieces becoming obvious in ways he couldn't quite articulate. His hands moved with increasing confidence, assembling the puzzle in a configuration that felt right on some fundamental level. As the final piece clicked into place, the entire mechanism hummed to life, projecting a holographic image above the box, the ancient symbol of House Varen, intertwined with what appeared to be Earth's astronomical designation in an ancient Zeroyan star chart. The scholar stepped back, surprise evident on her alien features. Correct, she acknowledged. And more than correct, you have found the hidden truth within the puzzle. Few achieve this. Challenge of wisdom completed, announced the elder. The guardian has proven his intellectual worthiness. The next two challenges followed in rapid succession: endurance, which required Rai to navigate a maze of energy barriers that burned at the slightest touch, and sacrifice, where he had to surrender something of value. He chose a memento from Earth he'd carried for 5 years, a small piece of metal from the engineering project that had driven him to exile. Each challenge seemed impossibly difficult, yet, with each, the resonance between Rai and the ancient crystal arena grew stronger. Mila's device no longer merely warmed his skin. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, enhancing what she had called his chronomagnetic signature, until he could almost see the flows of energy around him, could anticipate movements before they occurred, could sense weaknesses in seemingly impenetrable barriers. By the time the gong sounded for the fifth and final challenge, Rai was exhausted, but strangely exhilarated. Something fundamental had awakened within him, or perhaps had been there all along, dormant, until Zeros's ancient technology called it forth. Final challenge. Protection, the elder declared. The guardian must demonstrate absolute commitment to those in his care. The arena floor shifted crystal plates, sliding apart to reveal a deep pit. Within it stood the three sisters bound to crystal pillars, surrounded by what appeared to be explosive charges. "The guardian must reach his wards before the charges detonate," explained the elder. "But he must first defeat the champion of House Thraxa." From the final gate emerged a warrior, unlike the others, lean, scarred eyes, burning with fanatical intensity. He wore no armor, only lightweight combat garb that allowed maximum mobility. In each hand, he held a vibration blade, their edges blurring with deadly potential. "Begin." The champion attacked with blistering speed, blades weaving patterns of death in the air between them. Rai barely evaded the first flurry, feeling one blade slice through his sleeve, drawing blood. The second attack drove him back toward the arena wall, away from the pit where the sisters stood in danger. Time was running out. He could see the charges beginning to glow, their detonation sequence initiated. The champion pressed his advantage, forcing Rai into defensive movements, preventing any progress toward the pit. Desperation fueled determination. Rai stopped trying to match the champion's speed, and instead focused on the resonance he felt with the arena itself. Myla's device pulsed against his chest, its rhythm synchronizing with the crystal beneath his feet. Suddenly, he could see it, not with his eyes, but with some other sense awakened by the ancient technology. Lines of force crisscrossing the arena floor, nodes of power at key intersections. And at the center, directly beneath the pit, a nexus of energy, unlike anything he'd encountered before. The Starstone. It had to be. Hidden beneath the arena all this time, its power channeled through the crystal structure for the sacred rituals of Zeroyan tradition. In that moment of clarity, Rai made his decision. Instead of continuing to engage the champion directly, he dropped to one knee, placing his palm flat against the crystal floor. The resonance surged Myla's device, flaring with blinding light. Time shifted. Not stopping, not rewinding, but flowing differently around him. The champion's movements became sluggish, predictable. The charging detonation sequence slowed to a crawl. Rai moved through the altered time flow, with newfound grace, easily sidestepping the champion's now telegraphed attacks. He raced toward the pit, leaping down into its depths, just as the time distortion began to fade. Landing beside the sisters, he worked quickly to release their bonds. "What are you doing?" Aaron demanded. "The charges." "Trust me," Rai said, freeing her, then moving to Myla. "I need you to activate your resonance amplifier, full power." Understanding dawned in Myla's eyes as her bonds fell away. "You found it. The Starstone. It's beneath us. It always was." He freed Zira last, just as the charges resumed their normal detonation sequence, now seconds from explosion. "Join hands, all of you, and focus on the energy beneath our feet." The sisters complied without hesitation, forming a circle with Rai. Myla activated her device, its energy harmonizing with the one Rai wore. The crystal floor beneath them began to glow patterns of light, spreading outward in concentric rings. Above the council, elders rose in alarm. The Thraxa patriarch shouted commands, but his champion stood frozen at the pit's edge, transfixed by the unfolding energy pattern. The charges reached final detonation sequence. The floor of the pit dissolved into pure light, and the four figures at its center vanished. They materialized in a vast chamber deep beneath the arena, its walls, floor, and ceiling formed of the same crystal, as above but untouched by time or modification. At the center stood a pillar of light, the Starstone, not a physical object as legends described, but a construct of pure energy, maintained for millennia by technology, beyond current Zeroyan understanding. "By the ancestors," breathed Zira. "It's real." Myla approached the pillar reverently. "The combined knowledge of ancient Zeros, preserved all this time." Aaron remained practical. "We're still in the middle of a trial. How does this help us?" Rai studied the energy patterns flowing through the chamber. They resonated with him in ways he couldn't articulate, as if speaking a language his body understood, but his mind could not translate. Acting on instinct, He approached the starstone, extending his hand toward its luminous surface. The pillar pulsed, acknowledging his presence. Patterns shifted, reformed, coalesced into symbols, ancient Zeroian script, interwoven with what appeared to be proto-human languages. "The sky visitors," Mila whispered. "They were human ancestors. They helped build early Zeroian civilization before the Great Drying forced them to leave." "And they left this," Rai said, understanding, flowing into him through his connection with the starstone. "A repository of knowledge, a connection between our species, a beacon for when we might return." The chamber trembled. Far above, they could hear commotion. The trial interrupted tradition, upended by this unexpected development. "We need to go back," Aaron insisted. "Finish the trial properly, or our position remains vulnerable." Rai nodded, but before stepping away from the starstone, he allowed its energy to flow through him one final time. Knowledge transferred in that brief contact, not all the repository contained, but enough. Enough to understand the connection between humans and Zeroians. Enough to know how to harness the chronomagnetic abilities that had manifested during the trial. Enough to change everything. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hands to the sisters. They joined hands once more, and Rai channeled the starstone's energy through their connected circle. The chamber dissolved around them, reforming into the arena above. They materialized at the center of the pit, but the charges were gone. Around them, the arena had fallen into chaos. Elders shouted commands. Noble representatives argued among themselves. The Thraxa patriarch bellowed accusations of trickery and forbidden technology. Rai stepped forward, still connected to the sisters. The starstone's energy flowed through him, visible as a faint aura surrounding their joined forms. "The trial of bonds is complete," he declared, his voice carrying unnatural resonance through the crystal arena. "The challenge of protection is fulfilled. My wards are safe, and House Thraxa's claim is invalidated." The eldest elder raised a hand, commanding silence. "What is this power you display, Guardian Sanders? What ancient force have you awakened beneath our sacred arena?" "Joe." "The Starstone," Rai answered simply. "The legacy of cooperation between our peoples, hidden and forgotten as Zeros changed. I did not seek it, but it recognized me as the ancestors intended." Murmurs spread through the assembly. The Thraxa patriarch surged to his feet. "Blasphemy! The off-worlder perverts our sacred traditions with alien technology. The trial must be declared invalid." "No," came a new voice. Lord Varen himself strode into the arena, looking more sober and dignified than Rai had ever seen him. "The prophecy is fulfilled exactly as the oldest texts foretold. When the Sky Visitor returns and awakens the Starstone, two peoples shall be reunited in common purpose." He approached Rai and the three sisters, dropping to one knee in formal obeisance. "Guardian Sanders has proven his worthiness beyond any challenge we might devise. The trial is complete, the bond confirmed by powers older than our council itself." The elders conferred among themselves, their ancient faces reflecting confusion, wonder, and calculation in equal measure. Finally, the eldest spoke. "The trial of bonds is concluded. Guardian Sanders has succeeded in all 5 challenges. The guardianship over the daughters of House Varen is confirmed until its natural conclusion. Furthermore," he continued, raising his voice as the Thraxa contingent began to protest, "in light of the extraordinary circumstances and the awakening of the Starstone, the Council grants House Varen restoration of all privileges and holdings previously forfeited." The pronouncement sent shockwaves through the assembly. Noble representatives broke into heated discussions. The Thraxa patriarch stormed from the arena, his defeated champion following in his wake. Lord Varen rose, turning to face his daughters. "The debt that drove me to desperate measures is now nullified. Your guardianship may be transferred back to me if the council permits." Rai felt a surprising pang at the thought. After all the trouble, all the danger, the idea of returning to his solitary existence seemed suddenly hollow. But before he could speak, Zera stepped forward. "Father, We wish to remain with Guardian Sanders until the contracted period concludes. Lord Varen's expression registered surprise, then thoughtful consideration. You are certain? Aaron nodded firmly. The bond has been tested and proven true. We stay with our guardian. Then it shall be as you wish, Lord Varen said, bowing slightly to Rye. Guardian Sanders, it seems my gamble paid greater dividends than I could have imagined. House Varen stands in your debt. As the formal proceedings concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Rye found himself standing with the three sisters in the center of the now quiet arena, the Starstone's energy still humming faintly beneath their feet. So, he said, uncertain how to process all that had transpired. 2 more years of guardianship. Unless you wish to petition for release, Mila suggested, though her tone indicated she hoped he would not. Rye considered the option. He could return to his solitary existence, complete his contract, leave Zeros behind as originally planned. Or he could embrace this unexpected family that fate and a drunken noble had thrust upon him. I think we still have work to do, he said finally. The Starstone, the connection between our species, there's much to explore. And House Thraxa remains a threat, Aaron added pragmatically. They won't accept defeat gracefully. Plus, we've grown rather accustomed to your dwelling, Zira said with a diplomatic smile. It would be inconvenient to relocate now. Rye laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the ancient crystal arena. Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse? 2 more years it is. Together, they walked from the arena into the harsh Zeroian sunlight, the first family of its kind, on a world of new possibilities. Behind them, beneath the ancient crystal floor, the Starstone pulsed with renewed purpose, a beacon connecting 2 species across time and space. In the months that followed, their lives transformed in ways none could have predicted. The dwelling expanded into a proper home, as Rye's role shifted from reluctant guardian to respected liaison between human mining operations and Zeroian noble houses. Aaron established a training program combining Earth combat techniques with Zeroian martial traditions. Mila dedicated herself to studying the Starstone, gradually deciphering its vast repository of knowledge. Zira navigated the complex political landscape, with growing influence positioning House Varen at the center of a new movement toward cooperation between humans and Zeroians. The bottle of Macallan remained unopened, displayed prominently in their shared living space, a reminder of how their unusual family had begun, and a promise for the future they would someday celebrate together. On quiet evenings, when the twin moons rose over the endless desert, they would sometimes sit together on the dwelling's roof, watching the stars and speaking of possibilities, of Earth and Zeros, of the past that connected them and the future they might build. And Rye, once so determined to remain isolated and alone, found himself grateful for the night a drunken alien noble had sold his daughters for a drink and changed the course of 2 worlds in the process. To new beginnings, he would say as the stars wheeled overhead and the desert winds sang through the crystalline cacti. To family, the sisters would respond. And beneath them, deep within the planet's ancient heart, the Starstone pulsed in affirmation.